I have been watching this political circus for years now, and just when you think you have seen it all, something happens that makes you realize we are living through one of the most bizarre chapters in North American history. I am talking about a sitting president of the United States repeatedly, persistently, almost obsessively suggesting that one of America's closest allies should simply become another state. Not as a joke at a dinner party, not as some offhand remark, but in official meetings, in formal diplomatic settings, with cameras rolling and the world watching. And the man who had to look him in the eye and respond, Canada is new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, a former central banker who probably never imagined his career would lead him to this particular moment. What happened in that room, what was said, and what it means for the future of North American relations is something every American needs to understand because the implications stretch far beyond the border we share with our northern neighbor. Let me take you back to December 5th, when the FIFA World Cup draw brought world leaders to Washington in what should have been a celebration of international cooperation and sporting unity. The 2026 World Cup, co-hosted by the United States, Canada, and Mexico, was supposed to symbolize everything good about North American partnership. Instead, it became the backdrop for one of the most uncomfortable diplomatic exchanges in recent memory. Prime Minister Mark Carney found himself in a private meeting with both President Trump and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. And what transpired in that room tells you everything you need to know about where we are as a continent right now. This was not about soccer. This was not about celebration. This was about tariffs, trade, and the fundamental question of whether Canada's sovereignty is negotiable. I have followed Donald Trump's political career since before he even considered running for office, and I can tell you that his fixation on Canada becoming the 51st state is not new, but it has reached a fever pitch that should concern everyone who cares about international norms and democratic sovereignty. During their White House meetings, Trump has returned to this suggestion again and again, presenting it almost as if he is offering Canada a favor, a way to escape the crushing tariffs he himself has imposed. Think about that logic for a moment. The president imposes punishing economic measures on an ally, then offers absorption into the United States as the solution to the problem he created. It is like setting someone's house on fire and then offering to let them move into your basement. What makes this moment particularly significant is the man who had to respond. Mark Carney is not Justin Trudeau. He is not a career politician who came up through the usual channels. Carney spent years running the Bank of Canada and then the Bank of England, navigating the 2008 financial crisis and Brexit with a steady hand that earned him respect across the political spectrum. When he looked at Trump and delivered his response, it carried weight that few could match. Canada is not for sale, Carney told the president directly. 5 words that will likely define his early tenure as prime minister. 5 words that drew a line in the sand that Trump seems incapable of recognizing. The response from Trump is camp has been fascinating to watch, and here is where things get truly interesting. Despite the fundamental conflict at the heart of these negotiations, despite Carney's firm rejection of the 51st state proposal, Trump has shown what can only be described as genuine fondness for the Canadian leader. He has called Carney a world-class leader and praised him as a tough negotiator. This stands in stark contrast to Trump's relationship with Trudeau, which devolved into public insults and barely concealed contempt. What does this tell us? Perhaps that Trump respects pushback more than accommodation. Perhaps that Carney's business and financial background speaks Trump's language in a way Trudeau's progressive politics never could. But make no mistake about what is actually at stake here. Carney has announced that a near-term deal to end Trump's sectoral tariffs is unlikely, essentially off the table for the foreseeable future. Instead, these negotiations will become part of the broader CUSMA review expected next year. For those who do not follow trade policy closely, CUSMA is the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, the successor to NAFTA that Trump himself renegotiated during his first term. Now he is using tariffs as leverage to extract even more concessions, and Carney has made clear that Canada will not be bullied into quick compromises. The dynamic that keeps me awake at night is simple. When one partner in a relationship keeps threatening economic harm while simultaneously proposing absorption, the entire concept of partnership breaks down. The dynamics of power in international relations have always fascinated me. And watching this particular dance between Trump and Carney reveals something profound about how modern diplomacy functions or fails to function in an era of strongman politics. When Trump sits across from a foreign leader and suggests their country should simply cease to exist as an independent nation, he is not making a serious policy proposal. He is establishing dominance, testing boundaries, seeing how far he can push before meeting resistance. What Carney understood and what Trudeau perhaps never fully grasped is that the only appropriate response to such tactics is absolute clarity. You do not negotiate with someone who questions your right to exist. You state your position and hold the line. I have spent considerable time analyzing what makes Carney's approach different from his predecessors. And I think it comes down to something fundamental about professional backgrounds and personal temperament. Justin Trudeau came from politics, from a family steeped in Canadian political royalty, and his instincts were always toward accommodation, toward finding common ground, toward the kind of diplomatic language that smooths over conflict without resolving it. Carney comes from central banking, a world where your credibility is your currency, and where saying exactly what you mean is not optional but essential. When a central banker speaks, markets move. Ambiguity is not a tool, it is a liability. That mindset has served Carney well in his initial encounters with Trump. The tariff situation deserves careful examination because it represents the core leverage Trump believes he holds over both Canada and Mexico. These are not tariffs designed to protect American industry in any meaningful sense. They are tariffs designed to inflict economic pain, to create pressure that can be released in exchange for concessions. It is a negotiating tactic borrowed from the world of real estate development and applied to international trade, and it has consequences that extend far beyond the negotiating table. American consumers pay higher prices, Canadian and Mexican workers lose jobs, supply chains that took decades to build face disruption that may never be fully repaired, all in service of what? The vague promise of a better deal that remains perpetually just out of reach. What struck me about Carney is public statements following these meetings was his refusal to pretend that progress had been made where none existed. He announced clearly that a near-term deal on sectoral tariffs was unlikely, pushing negotiations into the USMCA review process scheduled for next year. This might sound like diplomatic failure, but I see it differently. Carney is refusing to give Trump a quick win, refusing to reward the tariff strategy with immediate capitulation. He is betting that time favors Canada, that American businesses hurt by tariffs will pressure the administration, that the economic pain will eventually become Trump's problem rather than his. It is a risky strategy, but it is a strategy which is more than Trudeau ever seemed to have. The personal dynamics between these two leaders deserve attention because they reveal something important about how Trump processes the world. Here is a man who has called Mark Carney a world-class leader and praised his negotiating skills, even as Carney firmly rejects Trump's signature proposal. Meanwhile, Trump spent years mocking Trudeau, questioning his masculinity, and treating him with barely concealed contempt. The difference: Carney fights back without appearing desperate. He says no without apologizing. He projects strength without aggression. Trump, whatever his many faults, recognizes and responds to this kind of energy. It does not mean Carney will get a better deal. It means the conversation happens on different terms. I keep returning to that phrase, Canada is not for sale, because it captures something essential about what is happening here. Carney is not just rejecting a specific proposal. He is asserting a fundamental principle about national sovereignty that should not need to be stated between allies. The fact that it does need to be stated that a Canadian prime minister must explicitly tell an American president that his country's existence is not negotiable tells you everything about where we are in 2025. We have moved so far from normal diplomatic relations that basic sovereignty must be defended like a contested position. The 51st state suggestion is not a joke to be laughed off. It is a fundamental challenge that requires a fundamental response. And Carney, to his credit, seems to understand this in a way his predecessor did not. Let me walk you through the broader context of what these tariffs actually mean, because I think many Americans do not fully appreciate how deeply integrated our economy is with Canada is, and how much damage this confrontational approach is causing to both countries. We are not talking about some distant trading partner with whom we have occasional commercial contact. Canada is our largest trading partner with hundreds of billions of dollars flowing across the border every year. The auto industry, energy sector, manufacturing supply chains, agricultural trade, these are not abstract economic concepts. They are jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Texas, and across the country. When Trump imposes tariffs on Canadian goods, he is not punishing some foreign adversary. He is disrupting an economic relationship that American workers depend on every single day. The sectoral tariffs that Carney has declared unlikely to be resolved in the near term affect specific industries that have been carefully targeted for maximum leverage: steel and aluminum, automobile parts, energy products. These represent the pressure points that Trump believes will force Canadian concessions. But here is what the administration either does not understand or does not care about. These supply chains do not exist in isolation. A tariff on Canadian steel affects American manufacturers who use that steel. A tariff on auto parts raises costs for American car companies. A tariff on Canadian energy affects prices Americans pay at the pump. The pain is not contained north of the border. It spreads throughout the integrated North American economy that both countries spent decades building. What I find particularly telling is Trump's willingness to treat the CUSMA agreement, an agreement he himself championed and signed, as somehow inadequate and in need of revision before its scheduled review. This is the pattern we have seen throughout his career. Agreements are only good until they are not. Deals are only binding until he wants something different. Commitments last only until a better opportunity presents itself. For Canada and Mexico, this creates an impossible situation. How do you negotiate with a partner who views every agreement as temporary, every concession as a starting point for further demands? Carney seems to have decided that the answer is simply to stop playing that game, to refuse quick deals that will only be renegotiated, to push everything into formal processes that provide at least some structure and accountability. The meeting between Carney, Trump, and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum added another dimension to this already complicated situation. Mexico faces its own challenges with the Trump administration, its own tariff pressures, its own demands. Having both North American partners in the room together creates opportunities for coordination, but also risks of division. Trump is nothing if not skilled at playing parties against each other, at suggesting that one might get a better deal if only they would be more cooperative than the other. Whether Carney and Sheinbaum can maintain a united front remains to be seen, but the early signs suggest they understand the importance of solidarity in the face of these tactics. I want to address something that I think gets lost in the coverage of these events: the fundamental absurdity of the 51st state proposal itself. We are talking about absorbing a country of nearly 40 million people with its own constitution, its own legal system, its own currency, its own military, its own healthcare system, its own political culture, developed over more than 150 years of independence. This is not like acquiring a territory. This is not like admitting a state that was previously part of the Union. This would be, in practical terms, completely impossible, even if Canadians wanted it, which polling consistently shows they absolutely do not. Trump either knows this and does not care, using the proposal purely as a rhetorical weapon, or he genuinely does not understand the basic realities of what he is suggesting. Neither possibility is particularly reassuring. The response from ordinary Canadians to all of this has been fascinating to observe from down here. Polls show support for resistance to American pressure running extremely high, with even Canadians who might typically be sympathetic to closer ties with the United States expressing deep offense at the 51st state rhetoric. Trump may think he is negotiating from strength, but he is actually unifying Canadian public opinion against him in ways that constrain whatever flexibility Carney might otherwise have. When your negotiating position is so insulting that it turns your counterpart as domestic politics into a wall of opposition, you have miscalculated badly. Carney cannot give Trump what he wants, even if he wanted to, because the Canadian public would never accept it. That is the trap Trump has built for himself with this approach. As I consider where this relationship goes from here, I find myself oscillating between cautious optimism and deep concern. The cautious optimism comes from watching Carney handle these initial encounters with skill and backbone, from seeing a Canadian leader who seems to understand the game being played and refuses to be manipulated. The deep concern comes from recognizing that the fundamental dynamics have not changed, that Trump still holds the tariff weapon, that the American economy's size gives it leverage that Canada simply cannot match in direct confrontation. The question is not whether Carney can win this negotiation in some absolute sense. The question is whether he can navigate it in a way that preserves Canadian interests and sovereignty while managing an economic relationship that both countries need. The CUSMA review process that Carney has pointed to as the venue for resolving these disputes is scheduled for next year, and it will be one of the most consequential trade negotiations in recent memory. Unlike the current tariff disputes, which Trump can escalate or de-escalate at will, the CUSMA review has structured timelines and requirements that provide at least some guardrails. It is not a perfect process, and Trump has shown willingness to blow past institutional constraints when they inconvenience him. But it is better than the current situation of arbitrary tariff threats and impossible demands. Carney is betting that getting into that formal process will advantage Canada, and I think he is probably right. What concerns me most about all of this is what it says about American reliability as an ally and partner. I have criticized Trump for years, but this goes beyond any single president. The message we are sending to the world is that the United States cannot be trusted to honor its commitments, that agreements signed by one administration will be challenged by the next, that even our closest allies must prepare for the possibility that we will treat them as adversaries. Canada will survive this. The relationship will continue in some form, but the trust that has been damaged, the norms that have been violated, the precedents that have been set, these things matter beyond any single negotiation. We are teaching the world that America's word means nothing, and that lesson will have consequences for decades to come. I think about Carney's background in central banking and what it might mean for how this plays out. Central bankers are trained to think in long time horizons, to consider consequences that extend years and decades into the future, to prioritize stability and credibility over short-term gains. Trump, by contrast, thinks in terms of deals, of immediate wins and losses, of headlines and ratings. These are fundamentally different ways of processing the world, and they lead to fundamentally different strategies. Carney is playing a long game, absorbing short-term pain to preserve long-term position. Trump wants the quick victory, the photo opportunity, the announcement of a deal. Whether Carney's patience outlasts Trump's attention span may determine the outcome. The human element of all this should not be overlooked either. Carney is new to elected politics, new to the prime ministership, facing perhaps the most challenging bilateral relationship Canada has experienced in generations. The pressure he is under is immense, and how he handles it will define his legacy. Trump has called him a world-class leader and a tough negotiator, which suggests at least some measure of respect. But Trump's respect is always contingent, always subject to change based on the latest interaction or perceived slight. Carney must navigate this personal dynamic while simultaneously representing the interests of 40 million Canadians who are watching his every move. It is a burden I would not wish on anyone. Let me leave you with this thought as we watch this situation continue to develop. The 51st state proposal was never about actual annexation. It was about establishing dominance, about making Canada feel small, about creating a frame where anything less than absorption would seem like a concession Trump was graciously granting. Carney is refusal to engage with that frame. His flat statement that Canada is not for sale resets the conversation to something approaching reality. That is not nothing. In dealing with Trump, sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to accept his premises, refuse to play his game, refuse to treat absurdity as worthy of serious response. Carney seems to understand this. Whether that understanding translates into successful navigation of the challenges ahead, we will have to wait and see. But for now, Canada has a leader who knows how to say no, and that matters more than most people realize. In today's digital world, cryptocurrency is no longer just a trend. For many people, it has become a real business opportunity that can be started with basic knowledge and an internet connection. The first step in treating crypto as a business is education. Understanding simple concepts like Bitcoin, Ethereum, wallets, exchanges, and how the market works is essential before putting in any money. Some people use trading to earn short-term profits, while others focus on long-term holding. And there are also options like staking and passive income where crypto can grow over time without constant buying and selling. What makes crypto attractive is flexibility. You can work from anywhere, control your own schedule, and start with a small amount if you are careful. However, crypto is not gambling. Successful people treat it seriously. They do proper research, manage risk wisely, and never invest money they cannot afford to lose. The market goes up and down, so patience and discipline matter more than chasing quick profits. When crypto is handled with planning and consistency, it can become a long-term income path instead of a risky shortcut. If you want more simple and practical videos about crypto and online income, make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay connected for upcoming content.